In this video, I'm going to tell you the entirety of the Trojan War cycle. This is the story that is the backdrop context for the Iliad, the Odyssey, but also it is what kickstarts all of Western civilization, Western culture, and Western literature. Every hero from the time of ancient Greece to our own Marvel movies coming out every other week here in the West today in 2025 as I record this, they are all inspired, motivated, altered, influenced by the Trojan War cycle. That is the first of all of them. So I'm going to give you the backdrop of all of this. The way to think about this is the Greeks were the cultural center for the Romans. The Romans spread their culture throughout the known world at that time. As we went into a dark ages, the Renaissance is the rebirth of Greek ideas and Greek stories, and most particularly of the stories of Homer and of the stories of the Trojan War. Now, like many oral traditions, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of stories that were being told around the Mediterranean when these stories were solidified by one man by the name of Homer. That's how we traditionally understand him. As one man did not compile all the stories, but he took some aspects of them and crafted them into a beautiful story that we know as the Iliad. And then he has another story, a follow-up story that we know of as the Odyssey. And today, as we record this, they are, I think in post-production, they're finishing up the production by Christopher Nolan for the Odyssey itself. So of these thousands of traditional stories that were being told around the 11th, 10th, 9th, 8th century, so that is from the time of the Trojan War itself, somewhere in the 11th century BC to around 8th century BC, when Homer, listening and learning and being a bard, telling the stories like every other bard at his time of these Trojan Wars, he took those stories and crafted them into a very specific 24 books or scrolls that tell just a few days of this story at the 10th year of this 10-year long war. So he doesn't tell the story at the beginning. He doesn't tell all these other stories. He hones in on just a few days in the 10th year. Now, in the backdrop, when you read the Iliad, in the backdrop of it is all the context of who these characters are, of their backstory, the historical context for the Greeks, their own mythology, their own religion. That's all baked in and built into the Iliad itself. So when you in 2025 go in to read the Iliad, well, you kind of need to have some background. So that's what I'm going to give you today is the background for the Iliad, the Odyssey, and all of Western culture and literature, which starts with this story. So I'm going to break this up into three sections. Before Homer's Iliad, that is, what are the most important elements or elemental things that happen before Homer starts his story at the 10th year of the war? Then I'm going to tell you the whole story of the Homer's Iliad, just condensed, of course. And then I'm going to tell you the post-Iliadic story. So the story that happens after the Iliad, which will include a little bit of the Odyssey, but the broad strokes, particularly focusing on the fall of Troy. So we're going to look at the whole scope of the fall of Troy. So part one, before Homer's Iliad. At the very beginning of the story is the apple of discord. And this happens at a wedding between a mortal and an immortal. So the mortal, Peleus, he is marrying Thetis, the goddess sea nymph. And at their wedding, they invite all the gods and goddesses, except for one. And they leave out the goddess of discord, Eris. So she learns about the wedding, feels spurned, and as a goddess of discord, of course, she decides to cause chaos or cause discord. And the way that she does this is she gets a beautiful golden apple and inscribes on it, "To the fairest." With that apple, she throws the apple into the center of the feast with all the gods and immortals, and 3 goddesses go to pick up the apple of discord. And each of them believes that she is the fairest or the most beautiful. These goddesses are Hera, the queen of the gods, the wife of Zeus, the thunder bearer, Athena, the goddess of wisdom, and Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty. Now, these 3 goddesses argue about who's the fairest. They bring the apple then to Zeus to be the judge. Being a judge is a very important thing that a leader does. Zeus, very smartly, delegates this role. He says, I'm not going to make this decision. This seems like a really bad idea. I don't think things are going to go well for me if I do that. He sees a shepherd prince of Troy walking around the outside the walls of Troy, one of the most beautiful, fantastic cities of the ancient world. And he says, hey, you, I want you to actually be the one to make this judgment. So he throws the apple to Paris and he says, you have to make this decision. So of course, each of the goddesses make a promise to Paris that if he chooses her, then he will get a special prize. And each goddess gives him a special reward. Hera promises Paris unmatched royalty, that he will be a king among kings. Athena promises him victory in battle and wisdom. Aphrodite promises him the most beautiful woman in the world. Now you would think, if he really was already wise, apparently he wasn't, that Paris would probably choose either Athena or Hera. After all, if you are victorious in battle and wise, maybe you can win the most beautiful woman in the world. Or if you have unmatched power as a king, maybe you can get the most beautiful woman in the world. But the problem was that the most beautiful woman in the world was Helen, and she was already married to the king of Sparta, Menelaus. So Paris, for whatever reason, he's a beauty, he likes women, he goes straight for Aphrodite. And she chooses him, he chooses her, and she promises to give him Helen, the most beautiful woman in the world. The gods of the ancient Greek world are unlike pretty much any other god you've ever heard of. They are bounded by natural laws, by reality, in a way that the Christian God is not. So Aphrodite cannot just snap her fingers and poof, there's the most beautiful woman in the world. No. She allows and gives Paris the power to abduct, steal away, or seduce, whatever you want to tell yourself, Helen from her husband Menelaus. Again, something very natural that can happen in the world. And that's exactly what Paris does. Menelaus is not happy about this. As you can imagine, if you had the most beautiful woman in the world as your wife, and now she's gone. To get her back, Menelaus, the king of Sparta, enlists his brother Agamemnon, who is the king of the main Greek forces. He is not the king over all the other Greeks. The Greeks did not have that kind of system. But he is the most powerful of all the Greeks because he had the most men under his control. So Agamemnon goes to all the other Greek kings and he marshals all of them to go sail against Troy and reclaim Helen, launching a war that would last a decade. This is why you hear the term Helen, the face that launched 1,000 ships. Because of her beauty, 1,000 Greek ships went across the Aegean Sea toward Troy to sack Troy, the home of Paris. While at Troy for 10 fierce years, hundreds of campaigns, sacking towns all around the city of Troy. Troy is a big walled city. All around it are villages and little towns. And through those 10 years, the Greeks are ravaging the whole countryside. The greatest of the Trojan forces, Hector, defends Troy very well throughout this time, matching almost the power and prowess of the greatest of all the warriors in all of human history, Achilles the Greek. Now, just before the Iliad, the story written by Homer, begins, Achilles and his Myrmidons, the fighters that fight with Achilles, have sacked another Trojan town. At the time of the Trojan War, when a warrior and his men attack and sack a town, all the men who participated run into the city, run into the town. They take all the goods, including all the beautiful women, and they divvy them up amongst the warriors who won, making decisions on who gets the most booty or loot, including slave women, based on who was the best warrior, who did the most, who was the most courageous, who had the most glory and honor. And as always, Achilles was tip of the spear. So he was given Briseis, the beautiful slave. Agamemnon gets Chryseis. Now, a lot of people get confused when they read the Iliad that there is Briseis and Chryseis. And it's like, why do they have to be so similar? This is really challenging for me to remember. Well, keep in mind, this is a great poetic device because the issue that starts off the Iliad, and that's what we're moving into now. We're going to move into part 2 of the story of the Trojan War cycle, which is Homer's Iliad. So now we've had the 10 years of war, we've had the origins of the war, now we have the war itself where there's a lot of detail. And the war begins with a quarrel between Achilles, the Greek, and Agamemnon, the Greek. And so there's discord amongst the Greek allies now. The discord is over Briseis and Chryseis. And the reason those names are so similar is, again, a poetic way of doing things. It's a way of saying that essentially the prize given to Agamemnon and the prize given to Achilles are equivalent. Briseis, Chryseis, they sound the same, they are the same. Remember, we're dealing with words. We don't have pictures. We can't show two twin women. We could just use their names as twins. The sun god Apollo is sending a plague to the Greek camp because one of Apollo's priests, aptly named Chrysis, is upset that his daughter Chryseis has been captured by Agamemnon and begs Apollo to intercede to get his daughter back. And to do that, Apollo sends this plague. Agamemnon, then trying to figure out what's the cause of this plague, discovers, or Achilles tells him that he believes, and others believe, that it's because he needs to give back the daughter of this priest. Agamemnon's furious because now his beautiful woman is going to be taken. So that means for him, he's less honorable. So what he does is he says, I'm going to take your prize then. And he takes Briseis. Remember, she's equal to Chryseis. This infuriates Achilles. He is the greatest warrior. All the battles up to that point have been won at the tip of his spear. And he says, forget it. If I go out and fight and win these things and they could just be taken away from me, I'm done. And he leaves the camp saying, I'm going to sail away back to Pythia where he's the king and he's going to just live out his life. Now, with Achilles absent, the Greeks do suffer heavy losses. Partly this is because Achilles has begged his mother, who was that woman at the very beginning, Thetis, and she's a sea goddess, and he begs her to go to Zeus and beg Zeus, king of all the gods. Achilles begs them to help him show the Greeks his real value by letting them lose. A lot happens throughout the Iliad. Go read the Iliad. I have a version that I put together, a modern translation that's anybody who speaks English today can read. It's in iambic pentameter, so it is in verse, so you get a sense of the grandeur of the story, but it's also very readable. I worked very hard to make it as readable as I could. So a lot happens when Achilles leaves. You have to read the Iliad to learn all the details. But the next really big event in this overall Trojan War cycle is that Achilles' best friend Patroclus dons Achilles' armor to rally all the Myrmidons, remember the fighters under Achilles, and he goes after and pushes back the Trojans because the Trojans have been winning more and more ground. They're going to burn down the entire Greek encampment. So Achilles allows Patroclus to go out and defend it. Unfortunately, Patroclus doesn't quite listen to Achilles' advice, which is not to go all the way into Troy. He does go all the way to Troy, and then Hector kills Patroclus. Lots of famous scenes here, lots of paintings and literature and music and songs about the death of Patroclus, about the grief that Achilles feels, and about what Achilles does next. And what Achilles does next is, overcome with grief and rage, Achilles returns to combat. He gets immortal divine armor from the god of the forge, Hephaestus. He goes into battle and he slaughters everyone. He fights even gods like the sea, the river god, and he pushes everybody back, slaughtering Trojans and their allies left and right. Eventually, Achilles faces off against Hector, the greatest of the Trojans. And then Achilles kills Hector. Initially, Achilles desecrates Hector's corpse, but eventually the king of Troy, Hector and Paris' father, the king Priam, comes to the Greek camp, meets with Achilles, kisses his hand, the hand of the man who killed his own son, and begs him to return Hector to Troy. And Achilles does so. And that is the end of the Iliad. Now you may be thinking, wait, where's the Trojan horse? That is not in the Iliad. Okay, so after the Iliad are all kinds of stories, and there's lots of stories that are told about the events that lead up to the final destruction of Troy, and then the return home of all of the heroes from Greece. One famous story after Homer's Iliad is Penthesilea, the Amazon, and Memnon of Ethiopia arrive to aid Troy, but fall to Achilles, whose own fate is now sealed by Paris' arrow. Paris shoots Achilles in Achilles' heel. Now, this is not in the Iliad, by the way. It's not even alluded to in the Iliad. But it is part of the Trojan War cycle. After Achilles' death, there are elaborate funeral games, which is a common thing with the Greek warriors. And there is fierce fighting amongst the Greeks, particularly amongst Ajax and Odysseus, to win the armor of Achilles. Because whoever wins the armor of Achilles is thought of as the best of the Greek warriors. They are the inheritors of Achilles. Ajax is a great warrior, probably second to only Achilles. But Odysseus is the wisest of the warriors. And Odysseus wins the armor. This ends with Ajax's exiting life of his own accord. Now, the war is still not over. The Trojans find new hope in Eurypylus, the mighty grandson of Heracles. He comes from distant lands, answering Troy's desperate plea, but it's Achilles' own son, Neoptolemus, who's now grown. He's summoned from the Isle of Skyros, confronts and kills Eurypylus. Next is the death of Paris. Paris, remember, is the one who started all of this. Paris is mortally wounded by a poisoned arrow from Philoctetes. Paris is desperate, he's weakened, and he seeks help from his first love, the nymph Oenone. But she is still bitter from his betrayal because he went after Helen, so she refuses him. Paris dies alone, lamenting love and war's tragic price. Now, with Paris fallen, the Trojans stand defiant for a final time, fighting heroically from their walls and towers. But the Greeks have one last strategy, devised by the cleverest, the wisest of all the Greeks, Odysseus. This is the famous Trojan horse. They build an enormous wooden horse, hiding their greatest warriors within its belly, and pretending to abandon the war entirely, they sail their ships just beyond sight. And the Trojans, believing the war finally over and the horse an offering to the gods, debated its meaning, ignoring warnings from Cassandra, who was gifted and cursed with foresight, yet fated never to be believed. The Trojans brought the horse within their gates as a sign of victory. That night, under cover of darkness, Odysseus and other great warriors emerged from the hollow horse, opened Troy's gates to their hidden comrades, and began the sacking and destruction of Troy. Now the fall and destruction of Troy is swift and merciless. Flames consumed towers and temples, screams filling the night as warriors sacked the city without restraint. King Priam, elderly and grieving for the loss of many of his 50 children, is slain at his household altar, an ultimate sacrilege. Hector's infant son, Astyanax, symbol of Troy's hope, was cruelly hurled from the city walls by Achilles' own son, Neoptolemus. The daughter of Priam and priestess of Apollo, Cassandra, is assaulted by Ajax the Lesser within the sacred temple of Athena, further enraging the goddess toward the Greeks. When dawn breaks, Troy was nothing but ash and ruin. The surviving Trojans, heartbroken and lost, faced slavery and exile, while victorious Greeks divided their spoils and prisoners. Yet their brutality had offended the gods deeply, and divine wrath awaited their voyage home. Thus began the troubled returns of the victorious Greeks. Tempest and shipwreck marked their paths. Punishment for their atrocities. Agamemnon, for instance, the leader of the Greek forces, returns to Mycenae, his empire, only to meet betrayal and death at the hands of his wife Clytemnestra and her lover. Odysseus wanders the seas for 10 arduous years, confronting monsters, temptations, divine wrath, before finally reaching his home, Ithaca, and his beloved Penelope. That is the broad strokes of everything you need to know to read the Iliad, the Odyssey, and pretty much all the Greek literature. Now, there's a lot of specific details that you can dig into. I think you should, but that is the start. That is what you need to know to get started with this. As I said, I have a book coming out of the Iliad, and of course, there's the Odyssey by Christopher Nolan coming out soon. So this is a great opportunity to really explore Greek literature, which is the beginnings of all of Western literature. It is the basis for our culture, for our history, and even for all the great events that have occurred since that time to the founding of America and to where we are, for better and worse, today.